Amber Wang, and welcome to Marginalia, where we discuss the impacts of literature and how it can shape our lives. Today, we're discussing Arthur Miller's All My Sons, a play that's centered around guilt, responsibility, and the moral consequences of one's actions. Now, before we start, let me introduce you to some background on the author, Arthur Miller, and the play's context. So, Miller was one of America's most influential playwriters, and he wrote All My Sons in 1947, just after World War II. And this timeline is really important, so make sure you keep that in mind because the play reflects the disillusionment with the American dream and it explores themes of business ethics, family loyalty, and social responsibility. Now, this novel is similar to The Great Gatsby, which is also a phenomenal piece exploring the aspects of American disillusionment set about the same time period. And inspired by a true story about a company that knowingly sold defective airplane parts to the military, Miller critiques the prioritization of profit over human life. And this play serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of ethical compromise and the heavy burden of guilt that follows. I'm going to switch it up a little bit and talk about our characters first before we talk about the overall themes and symbols. So let's get started with that, with our main character, Joe Keller. Joe is a deeply complex character who embodies both the loving family man and the ruthless businessman. And his belief that financial success ensures his family's security blinds him to the broader moral implications of his decisions. His downfall is inevitable because his justification for his actions is fundamentally flawed, which leads him to the practice of protecting his family by harming others, ultimately leading to his own family's destruction. His guilt is a silent force that drove his actions into a culmination in his final acceptance of responsibility through suicide. His demise serves as Miller's ultimate condemnation of self-interest masquerading as familial devotion. Continuously throughout the entire play, Joe keeps on repeating that he is the father and conveys a strong sense of paternalism, which he believes that it is his duty to take care of all of his family, which includes his wife and both of his sons. By the end of the play, Joe realizes that his guilt is not just personal, it is universal and it extends to every soldier who died because of his decision to sell defective airplane parts in the first place. However, Joe wasn't able to realize this until his son, one of his sons, Chris, explicitly told him that all the other soldiers believed in Joe and his kind-hearted acts, never thinking that Joe would be the one that caused their deaths. Joe's suicide is not just an escape, but an acknowledgement that he cannot live with the weight of his sins. Next is Chris Keller, who is one of Joey's sons. Now, Chris is the moral center of the play. He represents an idealism that clashes with his father's pragmaticism. Having fought in World War II, he believes in a world where people must take responsibility for one another due to his immense survivor's guilt. His confrontation with Joey is heartbreaking as he realizes his father's moral failings. Having learned the truth that he has convinced himself false this whole time, Chris' fine line of morale is shattered and he is left in ruins. His disillusionment represents the struggle between individual ambition and social responsibility, yet clashed with his father's familial loyalty. Chris's inability to reconcile his love for his father with the reality of his crimes reveals how guilt can erode relationships and force individuals to confront painful truths. He grapples with his own guilt as well. Though he did not commit the crime, he feels complicit in his father's wrongdoing by benefiting from the wealth it generated. Miller uses Chris to explore how guilt extends beyond the guilty party, affecting even those who strive for moral purity. Now there's Kate, who is Joey's wife and the mother of Chris and Larry. Kate is the play's most tragic figure, I would say. She refuses to accept her son Larry's death, clinging to the hope that he is still alive. Her denial is not just about Larry, though, but also about the guilt she knows Joey carries. She understands, perhaps better than anyone actually, that if Larry is truly dead, it means Joey is responsible, and accepting that truth would destroy their family. Her role highlights the emotional toll of self-deception. Her guilt operates on a different level. She does not bear direct responsibility for Joey's actions, yet she enables his denial, compounding the family's suffering. She serves as a reminder that guilt does not only afflict the guilty, it extends to those who stand by and allow injustices to persist, such as Chris from the beginning. Furthermore, Kate is tragic in that she is unable to express her feelings and everything she knows out loud to anyone besides Joey, which is quite literally the reason behind all her guilt. She has no trustworthy outlet and therefore must contain all her anger and despair within herself, leading to a dreadful life before and even after Joey's death. That was all the family members in the Kellers family. And now we're going to be talking about the Devers family, which consists of Steve, who is the man that took the blame for the defective airplane parts and is now in jail, and Anne and George, who are present in the play. First of all, Anne. She is pivotal in the play as an embodiment of moral conflict. As the daughter of Steve, who, like I mentioned before, is Joey's former business partner who took the fall for the airplane parts, she represents the cost of Joey's actions on another family. Initially, she seeks a fresh start with Chris, believing in a future unattained by the past. However, she ultimately brings the devastating letter that forces the truth into the open, which we will talk about later. Anne has a key role. She is both a harbinger of truth and an innocent bystander caught in the consequences of others' guilt. Ultimately, though, Anne just wants to build a life for herself, but her past, though shaped by consequences beyond her control, continues to hold her back. So I think that she's also a tragic figure like Kate, because she essentially cannot control anything that happens, not only because she didn't commit anything, but also as a woman in the 1950s. She doesn't have a lot of power to talk back or to express her own feelings. And that's the same thing that Kate suffers through as well. Finally, there's George, who is Anne's brother and Steve's son. Now, George is a catalyst for uncovering the truth about the Kellers' crimes, embodying both righteous anger and personal disillusionment. Because initially, George arrives with the intent of seeking justice for his father, but his anger is fueled by years of believing in the legal system, only to realize that his father was unfairly imprisoned while Joey continued to profit. However, George is not merely an avenger. His character reflects the deep emotional wounds caused by betrayal and misplaced trust. His visit to the Keller home reveals his inner conflict. Whereas he seeks justice, he is also torn by memories of past friendships with Chris and affection for the Keller family. This duality makes him a tragic figure as well, as he is forced to reconcile his loyalty to his father with the painful truth about those he once trusted. George's role highlights the broader theme of guilt extending beyond the Keller family, illustrating how corruption and even moral compromise ripple outward, affecting even those who are not directly involved. His confrontation with the Kellers does not bring the resolution he desires, but it forces the characters to face the unavoidable consequences of their actions, finally. Ultimately, George represents the scars left by deception, showing how guilt and injustice extend beyond the perpetrators to those left in their wake. I think that was a lot to unpack, but that was it for our characters, and now we're going to be moving on to the themes and symbolism in this play. First of all, let's start off with the American dream and its corruption. At its core, All My Sons examines the dark side of the American dream, like many other books, such as The Great Gatsby. Joey Keller, a successful businessman, embodies the pursuit of wealth and success, but all at the cost of morality. His actions, covering up the shipment of defective airplane parts that led to the death of 21 pilots, reflected ruthless ambition that places profit above human life. And that is exactly what Chris critiques after having been on the battlefields in the war. The play questions whether the American dream, as traditionally defined, is sustainable if it leads to moral compromise. Joey's downfall illustrates the consequences of unchecked capitalism and the ethical dilemmas inherent in prioritizing financial success over human integrity. His guilt festers throughout the play, manifesting in defensiveness, denial, and a growing desperation, most importantly, to justify his choices. Miller suggests that guilt cannot be erased through excuses. It can only be confronted, or it consumes those who bear it, like it did with Joey. Now let's talk about the letter that was sent from Larry to Anne that we briefly mentioned before, and Larry's fate overall. Now, Larry's absence serves as a lingering question throughout the play, but the revelation of his letter brings everything to a tragic climax, while also combined with Kate's desperation. Anne Deaver, Larry's former fiancée and Chris's current love interest, holds the letter that confirms Larry's suicide upon learning of his father's crimes. The letter serves as a symbol of truth and the inescapability of consequences. Joey's insistence that he did everything for his sons is shattered when he realizes that his actions led directly to his own son's death. Larry's suicide is the ultimate representation of guilt, not just Joey's, but society's collective failure to uphold moral responsibility. This moment is pivotal, as it forces Joey to finally see the human cost of his choices. The weight of his guilt becomes unbearable, leading to his final, irreversible decision, which is his suicide. And through everything combined, I do believe that Larry's letter and Larry's fate is the reason why Joey committed suicide. Because he tried to justify everything for his sons. But this is the needle that shattered it all. I didn't catch this symbol at first, but it was a reoccurring object throughout the entire play. So I did some research and I want to talk about the tree, which is apparently planted in memory of Larry, despite Kate's initial protest. The tree represents the Keller family's hope that Larry is still alive, but when it falls in a storm in the beginning, it foreshadows the coming collapse of the family and the revelation of Joey's guilt. The destruction of the tree coincides with the arrival of Anne, who carries the truth about Larry's death, reinforcing the idea that the past cannot remain buried forever. And reflecting back, I think this is such a unique and clever, smart moment in the play that Miller inserts, where Anne's arrival literally signifies to the storm that she brings with her. Now, the tree also functions as a metaphor for Joey's fragile psychological state. His attempt to compartmentalize his guilt is ultimately futile, as the weight of his actions comes crashing down just as the tree does. Arthur Miller uses the symbol to emphasize that guilt, like nature, cannot be controlled or ignored indefinitely. It will surface, often in unexpected and, like this case, destructive ways. Lastly, the most important symbol of all, I think, is family betrayal and guilt that's represented in this play. The family dynamic in this play is fraught with tension. Joey Keller justifies his actions by claiming he did it for his family, particularly his surviving son, Chris. However, this justification unravels when Chris, who holds an idealistic belief in honesty and responsibility, discovers his father's guilt. The relationship between father and son mirrors a generational conflict between practicality and idealism. Moreover, the ghost of Larry looms over the play, symbolizing the cost of Joey's decisions. Joey's guilt is inescapable, manifesting in his denial, his justifications, and ultimately his tragic end. His refusal to accept responsibility until the final moments underscores the devastating effects of guilt when ignored or suppressed. The play reveals that guilt is not an abstract concept. It actually has tangible consequences, shaping relationships, actions, and ultimately leading to destruction. Right here, I want to insert something that I had found. So, first of all, on page 35 in the play, Chris Keller says, responsibility, man for man. And I believe it is on the bottom of page 35 and stems over to page 36. I want to contrast this phrase with page 70 in Act 2 when Joe Keller says, Chris, I did it for you. I want you to think about the usage of for in both of these phrases, and I want to unpack it with you together. So in the first phrase, man for man, we can see that this phrase leans toward the theme of social responsibility because Chris says this after reflecting on his experience of World War II and how he learned that as a survivor, he suddenly has this new responsibility and he needs to find a reason to live because he didn't die. And that's all part of his survivor's guilt, which is such an interesting concept that Miller brings up too. And furthermore, Miller uses the same word twice, man and man, but puts them at the beginning of the sentence and one at the end. So I think he uses the same word twice because he's trying to convey the sense that man are all equal. All of mankind are equal. And the first one specifically represents the individual. And the second one is the rest of mankind. And that points to how man and man are interconnected, no matter your position, your career, whatever you do, how you make money. Man and man are all connected. And you're doing this not only for one another, but because you all exist in this world. And that really takes a toll on you when you realize that in this context, Chris says this out of the World War II experience. Miller conveys this all through a simple yet grand vocabulary. You see, all these words we understand, of course, they're concrete, they're solid, they don't really have any other indirect meanings other than the ones that we just unpacked. And I think he does this because he wants to illustrate the fact that this concept, that man for man, is so simple, but we often look past it. We often ignore it. That's why we have to think deeply about this to uncover its real meaning, because that's how we do it in real life. We don't practice this concept the way that it's supposed to be, the way that it's supposed to be so pure. And this really just all makes you think about the social responsibility that is ingrained on Chris after his experience. And just imagine how he feels when he comes home to realize that his father is the one that caused his despair when he was in the army, when he felt that all of his men were dead. They were gone with the wind. They were just wiped out. And he finds out that it was all due to his father's doings. Now let's transition to the second phrase, Chris, I did it for you, on page 70. I think for in this case represents that there's actually a purpose behind Joey's actions, and it is Chris. The reason is Chris. He's doing it because of Chris, who is his son. And this really reflects the title. I mean, all my sons. He's literally doing it for all of his sons, Larry too, but mostly Chris because of the context. And Joey thinks that there's nothing wrong with his actions, or that's actually exaggerating, but Joey isn't fully aware of how messed up his action is, even though he's justifying it that he did it for his sons. Because to him, family comes first, but his definition of family is so different from Chris's that it just divides their morality. Also, I think 4 in this case signifies that it only concerns Chris. But Joey's actions affect more than just his family, more than just Chris. But he fails to realize that until it's too late. And this carries on to my next point, which is the wording that Miller uses for this phrase. And it's quite simple to understand, yes, as well, but it's more justifying and accusational combined with a sense of avoidance than the other one, because that's exactly how Joey feels and what he conveys to Chris. And Miller undermines his words by using it to undermine the consequences, the deaths of 21 men, because that's how Joey thinks of it. He undermines the consequences that his actions had caused, because he thinks that if it doesn't affect his family, then it doesn't have any real effects at all. And this phrase definitely highlights more of a familial loyalty than a social responsibility in the other phrase. And I want to point out that Joey explicitly states, Chris, I did it for you, that he did his actions because of Chris. But normally, parents wouldn't really say anything like that out loud to their children because it's not expected, but it is at the same time. Like, children know that what their parents are doing are all for them. And obviously, we try to repay them. And we don't say it back out loud that we did it for you because you did it for us. No, that's all hidden. But the fact that Joey had to say it out loud in this scene means how much Chris does not understand. And rightfully so, because it is unbelievable what Joey has done. And this also highlights how Joey feels, that he just fails to see that his actions are incredibly wrong and immoral. After those analyses, I hope you have a greater understanding of the book than you had before, and I hope you had fun unpacking it as well, because I certainly did. It was my first time reading a play, and All My Sons really set a high standard. The story flowed by really smoothly, and it's unbelievable how meaningful these events happened, but all in less than 24 hours. Now, the story definitely holds some reality, as it's not only based on real events, but the narration and symbolism conveyed are really vivid as well. Overall, I would give this play a 10 out of 10, as my reading experience was amazing. This book also flowed by really fast for me. With that being said, I highly encourage you to check out this book, and thank you for tuning into this episode of Marginalia. Until next time, happy reading.